Support for today's episode comes from Amazon. Amazon is working toward a carbon free energy future, doing more with less, investing where it matters most, and supporting communities where we operate. Visit the link in our show notes to learn more about Amazon's spotlight on energy. Why reliability is now a procurement budget line item. Companies can buy electricity. Increasingly, they also have to decide how much reliability they are willing to buy for themselves. For most facilities, reliability has historically been buried inside the electricity purchase, an assumption built on a simple division of labor. The utility delivered power, facilities teams maintained backup systems for critical loads, and procurement negotiated equipment and service contracts around whatever that arrangement required. That division is getting harder to maintain. North American electricity demand is rising at a pace the grid has not had to accommodate in years. NERC's latest long-term assessment projects summer peak demand will increase by 224 gigawatts over the next decade, a more than 69% jump from the prior year's forecast, with new data centers and other large commercial and industrial loads responsible for most of the increase. NERC warns that uncertainty around how quickly new generation can be added is increasing resource adequacy concerns across 5 regions it now flags as facing high reliability risk by 2030. That does not mean businesses should expect the grid to become broadly unreliable, but it does mean companies with low tolerance for interruption have another procurement decision to make. The electricity supply and the infrastructure required to keep a facility operating through a disruption are no longer necessarily the same purchase. Buying power is not the same as buying continuity. This distinction matters because the reliability problem extends beyond whether enough electricity exists somewhere on the system. A facility can have a utility connection and still need UPS systems, battery storage, transfer switches, generators, on-site generation, controls, or a microgrid to achieve the continuity its operations actually require. And that gap is already reshaping how companies evaluate where to locate new facilities in the first place. The Uptime Institute's 2026 outage analysis offers a useful example from the data center sector. Outage frequency per site has declined for a 5th consecutive year, evidence that reliability investments can work. But power remains the leading cause of impactful outages, and Uptime says worsening grid constraints and high-density workloads are creating new pressure points. Failures involving UPS systems, transfer switches, and generators remain prominent. The lesson extends well beyond data centers. Hospitals, manufacturers, warehouses, laboratories, food processors, and increasingly automated commercial facilities all have different thresholds for how long equipment or processes can lose power before an interruption becomes a business event, which means procurement has to answer a question an electricity contract alone cannot settle: what level of continuity the organization is actually buying. Redundancy has its own supply chain. Once reliability is treated as something a company may need to procure, the buying decision gets more complicated. Because a resilient system is rarely one piece of equipment. It can involve batteries, inverters, switchgear, generators, controls, transformers, communications equipment, and engineering services. And it may also require interconnection work, permitting, construction, and long-term maintenance. DOE's Federal Energy Management Program reflects that complexity in its own guidance. Its commercial-scale microgrid development checklist runs through planning, design, procurement, and implementation, while separate federal resources address battery energy storage procurement and distributed energy interconnection. That matters for corporate procurement teams because reliability cannot always be added at the end of a facility project. Sizing the required equipment, identifying critical loads, getting different technologies to work together, assigning maintenance responsibilities, and deciding how much redundancy is enough all take time. And the contracts procurement teams already sign tend to assume energy availability rather than plan around its absence. A company that makes these decisions after a facility's power architecture has already been designed has fewer options than one that puts reliability requirements into the procurement process from the beginning. The investment can earn its keep before an outage ever happens. There is another reason reliability belongs in the procurement conversation earlier rather than later. Some of the infrastructure can generate value long before anything goes wrong. DOE said in June that microgrids are generally deployed where businesses or communities cannot tolerate significant outages. But grid-connected systems can also create economic value during normal operations, depending on the configuration and local tariff, through reduced peak demand charges, shifted consumption across time-of-use rates, and optimized use of on-site generation and storage. That reframes the purchasing decision. A battery can serve a resilience function during an outage and an energy management function every other day, rather than sitting idle as insurance the organization hopes never to use. DOE's resilience planning framework builds on that logic by starting with the cost of a grid outage and using that baseline to evaluate the potential avoided cost of resilience investment, which gives procurement a way to weigh reliability infrastructure alongside the energy, operational, and financial benefits it may also provide, including in markets where new interconnection rules are already changing how quickly loads can even get connected to the grid. Reliability requirements need to be defined before the purchase. None of this means every facility needs a microgrid or a large battery. Some operations can rely on existing backup generation, others can tolerate hours of downtime. Some critical loads need only seconds of ride-through rather than hours of independent operation. And a smaller group of facilities may need multiple layers of redundancy. That range is exactly why reliability needs its own line in the procurement discussion, one that starts with the operation rather than the technology. Which loads are critical? How quickly backup must respond? How long they need to remain online? What an interruption affects, and what level of failure the business is prepared to accept. Only once those answers exist does the question become whether storage, generation, UPS capacity, a microgrid, or some combination of them is the right fit. For years, procurement could largely treat grid reliability as part of the environment in which a facility operated. With electricity demand accelerating and NERC warning that resource additions may struggle to keep pace, that assumption is worth revisiting. Companies do not need to replace the grid to protect themselves out, but facilities that cannot afford to operate at whatever level of reliability the grid happens to provide are increasingly the ones deciding to procure the difference themselves. Sustainability Soundbites' energy coverage is sponsored by Amazon. For sponsorship opportunities with Environment and Energy Leader, please reach out to a member of our team.